the story of a 30-year search by U.S. intelligence agencies to perfect mind control. Some of those engaged in that search have agreed to talk about it for the first time.
He was naive about this, and he felt pretty expert. He knew the whores, the pimps, the people who brought in the drugs.
White set up so-called safe houses for the CIA in New York, here in Greenwich Village. And later in San Francisco, in this hotel, and in an apartment atop Telegraph Hill with a commanding view of San Francisco Bay. While the existence of these safe houses was disclosed last year, details of what took place within them has not been told. A former CIA official who worked in the safe houses reveals that they were used not only for drug testing, but to study sexual behavior and how it could be used to manipulate people.
We did quite a study of prostitutes and their behavior. How do you take a woman who is willing to use her body to get money out of a guy to get him to talk about things which are much more important, like state secrets? We learned a lot about human nature in the bedroom. We started to pick up knowledge that could be used in operations.
There would be victims in all of this, but as the agency knew, they couldn't fight back. Some entries from George White's diaries. Clarice gets horrors. Janet, sky high. As one agency memo says, we have no answer to the moral question. The safe houses were not the only testing grounds. Millions of dollars would be spent on LSD research at universities throughout the country. And word would begin to spread on campus about this so-called mind-blowing drug. And suddenly, there was the counterculture of the 60s.
I give the CIA a total credit for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement, counterculture events of the 1960s.
Dr. Timothy Leary, the 1960s Johnny Appleseed of LSD.
The CIA funded and supported and encouraged hundreds of young psychiatrists to experiment with this drug. The fallout from that was that the young psychologists began taking it themselves, discovering that it was an intelligence-enhancing, consciousness-raising experience.
I know that some of the studies in which the CIA had supported used as subjects people who later became strong proselytizers of LSD. So in that sense, yes, I think that did sustain the perpetuation of the use of the drug. And it's rather ironic, isn't it?
The counter case that I would make in relationship to that is to remember that the people who were doing the research were people who would be doing the research regardless of who was the sponsor. I don't think anybody working in that time in the remotest ever thought that it would blow up into the kind of thing that it did.
History will judge the role of the CIA and other intelligence agencies in unwittingly contributing to the counterculture of the 60s through their intense interest in LSD and other hallucinogenics. But for the moment at least, the argument can be made that the CIA helped usher in the age of Aquarius.
ABC News Close-Up will continue in a moment.
Being careful about my body doesn't just mean major things like regular breast exams. I'm even careful about pain relievers. Plain aspirin sometimes upset my stomach, so I use Bufferin. It adds protection. I'm careful about what goes into my body. Bufferin gives me an added relief action I want. Tylenol doesn't.
Only one leading tablet has both an added relief action in many cases that Tylenol never provides, and protection ingredients. Bufferin.
Now I'm careful to get...
Well, okay, so I think we figured out a new kind of intro, and I like this idea of where I just put on some sort of a video that I need to watch with some music, and I just VJ it, DJ, VJ, whatever. And that'll be my intro. Hooray! I might have to change it up a little bit, but it's a good way to test the software and get it working. All right, let me check on some things, make sure my software is working right. Does it work if I push this button anymore? This is always the trouble here. If I can get it to do the same thing as yesterday. Okay, that's not what I want. This one is, right? Let me fix this window. Okay, but this is interesting, right? We could look at this for a second. Why not? Why not go into this? I'm okay with it. Okay. Where's it at again? Bam. Okay. 10 best forms of anti-gravity alternatives, right? There's a bunch of different papers on other things than gravity. We could explain what gravity means. Etymologically is from gravitas, which means stoic weight, or the opposite of stoicism, really. The weight or heaviness or pressure, or from guere, meaning heavy. So it's like, dude, this is really heavy, is kind of what gravity means. So it's a bad word to use when we're dealing with things like domain points or anything. I mean, weight is important, density is important, but if they're trying to use this term to, this is why they have terms like anti-gravity. It's just not really necessary if you expand the concept more. So gravity forms. No, this is wrong. Gravity. This is some software nonsense. Oh, that's funny. Well, okay, let me go further forward. Alternative theories of gravity, hotly disputed, formulated a few years ago. Now a new set of astronomers have produced observations that are consistent with predictions made in that study through their paper, and is yet to be peer reviewed. Lambda CDM cosmology expects galaxies to surrender. I don't know. Whatever. We'll move further. There are some better ones that I was looking at. Alternative theories of gravity. Where's it at? Ancient world. Okay, first off, important there. Ancient world, history of gravitational theory. Nature mechanisms in India. Aryabhata first identified gravity to explain why objects are not driven away from Earth by the centrifugal force of the planet's rotation. There was somebody who had something I really wanted to read. I was trying to find it. I'll just skip to this tab. I think this is how. Modified Newtonian dynamics is a hypothesis that proposes a modification of Newton's law of universal gravitation to account for observed properties of, quote, galaxies. It is an alternative to the hypothesis of dark matter in terms of explaining why galaxies do not appear to obey the currently understood laws of physics. Created in 1982, the first published in 1983 by Israeli physicist Mordechai Milgram. The hypothesis' original motivation was to explain why the velocity of stars in galaxies were observed to be larger than those expected based on Newtonian mechanics. I think it has to do with like size, relativity, but they're going to say that things work differently. Okay, I think I'm going to jump to the chapter I did really want to work on, though. Let me see. Well, we've got Tarbis. It's the same window. So what's the other one? Did be this one? Maybe. Okay, quantum dots. I don't know if that's the one. No, it should be the NAMU. The NAMU window. And I don't see it. Oh, wait, there it is. Boom. NAMU. Okay. And then I'll move it just slightly over because it seems like it's harder to read. Okay, great. I think we're getting to a place where this all works, which is pretty sweet. So in Sumerian mythology, Namu was a primeval goddess corresponding to Tiamat in Babylonian mythology. And I don't know if you can see how many tabs I have, but I have a lot of tabs. So there's a bunch of goddesses that we'd be looking through for a minute there. And to start, actually, let me jump to the other window. How's that work? Tarbis, and then click on, where is it? Boom. So Haaretz, Israel is touted as the birthplace of monotheism, but mounting evidence suggests that the Israelites and later Judahites, like their neighbors, worshipped a pantheon. So, you shall not plant any tree as an Ashera, besides the altar of the Lord your God that you shall make. Deuteronomy 16:21. Only existing first temple relics may be forged. There's a bunch of things here that are kind of interesting. Particle accelerator. There's some stuff happening. Anyway, the Old Testament is rife with the admonishment of errant kings and queens worshiping false gods, with the much with much of the blame falling on the kingdom of Israel and that of Ahab and his infamous queen Jezebel. In recent years, there has been a significant number of discoveries of cult stands and shrines, caches throughout the Israel. Caches, okay. They were found either buried in Favase underground cellars, or buried in caches such as at Hetzeva and Yevna, or found in various other settings like at Tel Rehov honey production site and at Tel Halif industrial textile area. The most recent findings were at Moza, just north of Jerusalem, where a cache of apparently cultic items were found in an ancient temple. Israel is often touted as the birthplace of monotheism, but the Moza artifact, so similar to those of distant Haziva and Kitzmit, taken in conjunction with the previously discovered stands, shrines, altars from Megiddo, Tanakh, and Beit Shean, paint a significantly richer picture of the religious life of the ancient land. Add the various figurines found strewn about the land of Israel of females in various poses and states of dresses and undress, as well as dogs, horses, and bulls. The iconography points to a pantheon of deities, as some scholars believe, or to two main deities, something of a duality. These practices of worshipping a pantheon or triumvirate godhead appears to have lasted throughout the late Iron Age of the land of Israel, 10th through 6th century BC, and ended only with the Babylonian conquest of Judah and apparently expulsion of its residents. The ancient practices were gone for good, not returning with the exiles from Persia and Babylon, several generations after the exile, who upon their return derided the Samaritans for pagan beliefs. Items that speak of God other than Yahweh or the One span from standing pillars, meseboth, decorated shrine boxes, horned altars, cult stands, and miniature icons, Judahite pillar figurines, known in archaeological terms as JPFs, in varying poses, holding a drum or a disc in one hand, a disc again like Autonism, cupping their breast, nude, pregnant, dressed, and so on. Adding to this are ceramic and metal animal figurines, as well as male figurines, some with horns. Interestingly, there are vastly more female figurines and representations found on shrines than there are of male ones. And now, add to this the groundbreaking finds at Kirbet al-Qom and Kuntalit Ajrud. Who's that girl? Going by what the Bible tells us, there were two major reforms against the apparent pagan practices. One by Elijah and the other by Josiah. And while there was much denouncement of them, the practice persisted, as can be seen in the endless complaints of the biblical writers and in the archaeological evidence. The evidence points to the worship of at least two deities. This is a good point to wonder what these deities' names were. In fact, we know from several inscriptions. The first is an inscription that was found in the 8th century tomb at the site of Kirbet al-Qom in the heart of Judah in a tomb. The inscription is a prayer and contains the name of Yahweh and that of Ashera. The latter is invoked 3 times. On one side of the inscription, a crude tree appears to have been incised as well. Another famous inscription was found at the site of Kuntalit Arjud on the border of Judah. It also dates to approximately the same period as the ones at Kirbet al-Qom. The site is scattered with dedicatory inscriptions to Yahweh and his Ashera. One stands out in particular, to Yahweh of Shamron and his Ashera, Michelle 2012, 86, folio 86 to 101. Shamron or Samaria. Shomron or Samaria was the capital of Israel, very far from this peripheral border of Judah. Along with the inscription, the drawings found with the inscription match the iconography found on the shrines. For instance, the Tree of Life, which volutes and lotuses blossoms from branches, feeding caprids, and lions standing underneath this Tree of Life. So, Iron Age Israelites were not monotheistics after all, or what do these cultic findings around Israel and Judah mean? It's a common joke in archaeological circles that if you don't know what something is, then it must be cultic. Many classes of objects, such as figurines, are contrary to what many of us think, not inherently cultic at all, says Michael Press, an expert in Philistine culture and religion. They could have been used in a variety of contexts and have a variety of functions. Some of these might be only religious in a broad sense, for instance, providing protection from evil. They might not have been religious at all, he adds. For instance, some of these might have been teaching tools. How can one know the difference? We have to carefully look at these types of buildings we find them in and what other objects they're associated with. A coastal tradition of cults. He also points out that the cultic finds aren't confined to Israel and Judah, and the 9th century BC Yavna shrines, the most spectacular finds of the last 15 years or so, are from a site within Philistia. They seem to represent a coastal Philistine tradition rather than an inland Judahite one. Similarly, imagery is seen on the shrines found throughout Israel and Judah as well, and in the surrounding Near Eastern lands. The broad and very important implication of these finds is that different political and ethnic groups used broadly similar classes of objects, though there were regional variations, says Press. Recent finds at Moza. Says Press. Recent finds at Moza of an apparent temple with figurines that differ from the typical Judahite pillar figurines and horse riders are the first clear example of a public cultic place in Judah, says Press. They also bear a remarkable resemblance to supposed Edomite examples from the Negev, from Horvat, Kitmit, and Hatsiva in Judah. At the same time, we have to be cautious about trying to draw too much information about something like religion from material culture, says Press. Archaeologists have a very difficult job in reconstructing the world of ideas. How people thought from material remains there. Gosh, sorry, it's like a few hours earlier for me, so I have to catch my brain up. There is a gigantic interpretive leap from concrete remains to abstract theory, and at best we only get glimpses of that sort of world. We only get glimpses of the sort of world of ideas and imagination. But was polytheistic worship of female figurines an official state religion? That is hard to prove, says Aaron Darby, professor of religious studies at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and an expert on Judahite pillar figurines. She adds that it depends on what one means by state religion. In her view, state religion refers to a religious activity performed by many of the people who lived within a national boundary. It is something sponsored or encouraged by the upper echelons, she elaborates. The Judahite pillar figurine certainly tells us that many of the people who lived in Judah, Israel, is a slightly different. That many of the people who lived in Judah, Israel, is a slightly different story. I don't know. That many of the people with the figurines lived in Judah. Israel's a slightly different story. I think this is translated, by the way, from Hebrew, which is also why it's kind of sometimes the grammar's off. Israel's a slightly different story. Used small terracotta females in rituals that I strongly believe relate to protecting and healing, most frequently taking place in homes and neighborhoods. This is especially true in Jerusalem, which is the corpus I know the best, Darby says. She does not believe, however, that there is the textual or archaeological evidence that connects these particular terracottas to Ashera, the female deity. The fact is that Judahite pillar figurines were found in two Jerusalem areas, Shiloh's area G and Ramat Ra'el. That, says Darby, indicates that people who were probably affiliated with either place or temple used figurines. Use of figurines continued in Jerusalem throughout the late Iron Age. At the same time, in our petrographic study, David Ben Shlomo and I found no evidence to support centralized manufacture by the state. Darby says, the data seems to suggest the possibility of multiple local manufacturers in Jerusalem. Figurines were probably produced by the same folk who made pottery vessels. In other words, daily practices in ancient Israel were more complex than the term monotheism suggests. Darby sums it up. I think you have tons of evidence to back this up, especially in the Jerusalem and outlying areas like Moza. Not even the Bible claims that most ancient Judeans were strict monotheists, she says, though it is always disputable whether shrine boxes or figurines attest to Ashera specifically. At a minimum, these objects suggest ancient religious life was as complex as anything in the modern world, Darby says. Ancient pantheons, not only from the famous Greek or Roman ones, had multiple members, including semi-divine lower-level deities. The typical version of monotheism associated with ancient Judah is the result of modern people choosing a few texts in the Bible to then reconstruct their ideal picture of what ancient Judeans did. She sums it up, but it clearly wasn't how people lived their lives. Okay, so here's a figurine of a female worship in the Neolithic times, so suggested to be 9,000 years old, but found in the Golan Heights. So definitely an interesting looking figurine. Pottery with calves and people. Mother goddess, clay, Yarmakuyan, goddess Ashtaroth, statue of Ashera. So examples of, a horse figurine. Things found in temples that are tend to be looking more from a foreign cult than from Abrahamic religions. Okay. So, and some people are like, yeah. Well, there's some other interesting stories there to find. And it's interesting when you think about like Hebram, so it means of Abram to an extent, like this idea of being of Abram, supposedly. And so that's kind of interesting because Abraham's this dude who was raised in a cave because he was, I don't know if he was raised in the cave of patriarchs, but he was raised in a cave because his father, Terah, had to hide him as a child, so he gave him to his uncle. So it's this Plato's cave-like narrative where Abraham is unable to see the light of day for a while. And when he does see the light of day through the cave, he's imagining, he's told of all these gods, including a god that's supposed to protect him, that doesn't protect him because he creates, or at least understands that there is another God that is the actual creator of all things, right? There's the God that's supposed to be a protector God, but that's not a real thing to him. And so all the symbols don't work for him in the cave. And that's pretty interesting that he's not surrounded in the regular city until he goes out into the regular city, and then he starts working in a shop selling idols for his uncle, and he smashes all the idols because he thinks they're silly. So he has no cultural reference to connect with these idols, and he thinks it's a great offense to this unknowable or unnameable God that interacts with him. And then he's kicked out of the city for doing so and sent to the desert, and there he meets this dude who brings him to this he's wandering in the desert. He goes to a oases, and there's a 700-year-old man, and that guy's Noah. So he meets Noah, and that's another thing is like these people's ages. This is the point in the Bible where their ages change. So you've got a dude who's 700, but then you got a dude who dies when he's like, what, few hundred years old, and then I think Moses dies at like 140 or something. So like according to the stories, like this is the point where all of a sudden their ages start to really quickly shorten, maybe because they're interacting with humans more, and their ages are depleted by interacting with humans. Who knows? They're supposed to be different enough than everyone else that maybe other people are aging that quickly, and it's really just their tribe. Who's to say? The angel hinders the offering of Isaac. That is a brutal picture right there. Abraham's gate. Pictures of Abraham. Well, a couple more things. We talked about the sins and glories of Pharaoh I, but we didn't really surmount it as quickly as that, so I wanted to bring this up. Because if you remember, Pharaoh Pharaoh. There we go. Is the dude who really ran the throne, the Dick Cheney of the 18th dynasty, and he controlled the throne. Look at these weird hats, by the way. I mean, that is like, it's like a birthday piñata sombrero, you know? Okay. Penultimate pharaoh of ancient Egypt is a term I keep hearing on. I've seen this on maybe like 9 different pharaoh pages. So maybe people are arguing because they don't know what's up, but let's do this really quickly as well. Let's go to predecessor. Interesting. What Oh yeah, because the mother, right? Yeah, that makes sense. So okay, that's actually worth looking at though too. So there's another guy, there's a female pharaoh, which is the wife, which is Nefer. Did I skip another one though? No, it's good. So it could have been Nefertiti, was Neferatun, but we think also it could have been the daughter of Nefertiti. And then this is good because Akhenaten. When is Akhenaten? Well, reign in this is like 13th century, mid 13th century, okay? And birth years are a little complicated, but it's beyond that, obviously, probably about 30 years beyond that, right? Because he didn't rule right away, because there was an older person who was ruling right before him. So maybe about 30 years after that's like 1390s or something, 1380s, 1390s, maybe 14 at the whatever, you know? So then do the Moses one though, right? Moses wiki. Let's just do that real quick. When is Moses supposed to have been? And then they say, generally, Moses is seen as a legendary figure, while retaining the possibility that Moses or a Moses-like figure existed in the 13th century BC. And just remember, so how close is that? So 13th century BC. Okay, so this is 13. This is 13. I think we're in the clear to start wondering even more. How do you stop these notifications? It's just go away notifications. It's just, I don't need you. Okay. Rabbinical Judaism calculated a lifespan of Moses corresponding to 1391. Remember we're saying late 1380s or 1390s. 1391 to 1271. So Akhenaten, 1350 to 1335, 1350 to 1334. And that's his reign, not his life, by the way, right? So looking a little further at it, you say, how old is Moses? And you're like, oh yeah, Moses is supposed to live to be 120. That's why we get the 1271, because he's supposed to live well after a normal human would live at the time, you think. But again, maybe a pharaoh who's either got a good health plan or is partially alien or something. I mean, 120, that's the story. Just thought you should know. So anyway, but the guy who was controlling everything and let a female be emperor and then king, and then allowed a kid to be king, and then he was king himself, in control of just trying to keep the family together, really, was penultimate pharaoh, they say. Prior to his rule, he was a close advisor to 2, perhaps 3 other pharaohs of the dynasty. It is theorized that he was the power behind the throne during Tutankhamun's reign. His prenomen Keperur means everlasting, are the manifestations of Ra. So his name is kind of similar, to some of the Atinisms, saying that Aten was a manifestation of Ra. I mean, his slippery slope right there. Both are very rare. Records and monuments that could be clearly attributed to Ai are rare, both because his reign was short and because his successor Horemheb instigated a campaign of damnatio memoriae against him and the other pharaohs associated with the unpopular Amarna period. Meaning he may have very well been related to them and tried to keep the rule going. So important. And then Horemheb tried to kind of end this he was like, we're going to make it stop. And look at these characters right here. Submission of the Western Asiatic foreigners on the tomb. So Western Asiatic foreigners. So that's very interesting. Submission of the Western Asiatic foreigners. So it tells you a lot right there about the Hyksos, because there's also this idea of the Hyksos invasion. And there's two Hyksos invasions, which are from 500 years earlier than this in the 18th century, supposedly, and then during the 13th century, and again, BC. So there are stories of this idea of them being invaded on the other side of things, and we'll get to the Semitic and Persian and Phoenician stories. But also, just to recap, Tarbis, also Adoniah, but Tarbis, according to Josephus, someone wanted me to say, so I will. Josephus was a Cushite princess of the kingdom of Cush, who married Moses prior to his marriage to Zipporah, as told in the book of Exodus. Tarbis is speculated to have been the daughter of King Merops, or the widow of Kikianus. According to the 1st century Romano-Jewish scholar Josephus, in Moses' early life, he had led the Egyptians in a campaign against the invading Ethiopians and defeated them. While Moses was besieging the city of Meru, Tarbis watched him lead the Egyptian army from within the city walls and fell in love with him. He agreed to marry her if she would procure the deliverance of the city into his power. She did so immediately, and Moses promptly married her. The account of this expedition is also mentioned by Erroneus, and we can probably do something at some point where we go into Erroneus and some of these other ministers who wrote histories, because a lot of their histories are based on their translations of other histories. So it's useful, but there's also some problems with Erroneus. So where are we at? After the war, when Moses sought to return to Egypt, Tarbis is said to have resisted and insisted that he remain in Ethiopia as her husband. He then, being most skillful in astronomy, cast 2 rings, one which caused the wearer to become forgetful, and the other to cause the wearer to remember all. He gave the first ring to Tarbis and wore the second himself, and waited for her oblivious nature to lose interest in retaining him as a husband. And when she had forgotten her love for him, he returned to Egypt alone. Some have suggested this period may have started when Moses was 27, and that he remained with Tarbis for 40 years. Although this number contradicts the traditional sources, which suggest that Moses killed an Egyptian overseer when he was approximately 40 years old himself. So, some have suggested that the story is an invention arising from the enigmatic verse in Numbers 12:1 that states, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman who he had married. Miriam is punished for her rebuke of her brother by being afflicted with leprosy. Moses is depicted with an Ethiopian wife in the 12th century painting by the Chaldeans. It is also suggested that Artapanus of Alexandria may have concocted the story to impress his pagan audience with such a love story. Well, I mean, you deserve to have somebody tell you that some of it might not be true. But the Midrash does say that, hey, dude, why do you leave your new wife, who's part of our family? Why are you not having sex with Sephora? Why are you only doing your original wife, Tarbis? And then God gave them leprosy. And that's in it's in the Bible. So it's not just in the Midrash. It's not just in the Talmud. It's not just some side story to dismiss. If they're going to believe in the thing, they should acknowledge issue 23 of the comic book. That's all I'm saying. So that's interesting. Tarbis matters. People should be more aware of Tarbis. And again, looking at Tarbis and then looking at, what is it again? Pharaoh. It's not going to be Pharaoh, but it'd be Ty, right? No, that's not it. Ty, wife, Akhenaten. No, not. It's daughter of Uya. But, this is what we're looking at right here. So this does look a lot like Tarbis. And her name is Ty. So there's something to that. I can't say that they are the same person necessarily, but there's something to that. And then, again, the movie. This is the movie, so very clearly they've set up the story to be this idea. Now, I don't know what they're trying to say about Moses being Charlton Heston, because I would have been. Are they doing it just because it's the 50s, or is there some weird truth to the the Caucasus Semitic story? Let's hope to find out, because true or false, it's an interesting story. But here's him with Zephyra, in the movie, in front of his like volcano situation. Oh, can I find that thing on Mount what's it called? Horeb. Okay. So people keep telling you that Mount Sinai is where things happen. And we looked at the Google Maps of Mount Sinai and everything, but this is interesting. The Bible talks about Mount Sinai a bit, but it also talks about Mount Horeb. In fact, it's mostly Paul who talks about Mount Sinai, which is on the Semitic and Egyptian side of things, compared to Mount Horeb, which is it's Saudi Arabia, really. It's Jal Habal. So Horeb is thought to mean glowing heat, reference to the sun, or might have meant burnt rock, because there's also the rock looked burnt, and there's this idea of the burnt rock. And so a bunch of people have gone looking in Egypt, and it's hard to do it in Saudi Arabia, but the ones who've gone to Saudi Arabia found Semitic markers, but then they were removed by the authorities in Saudi Arabia because they didn't want, and it's logical, you don't want to cause there to be people trying to pilgrim on your territory, so I get it, pioneers. But Exodus, the story of the burning bush, God had to remove his sandals. Horeb first occurs in Exodus 3:1 upon the rock at Horeb. So not necessarily Mount Sinai. Kind of interesting. And then where was the biblical locations? Consider Mount Horeb to be Willow Peak, but no, there was a better one, which is Jal Habal. But yes, there's the Christians considered this ancient monastery to be built around the area, but it looks like it's actually further east of this. So looking at Google Maps, we'll go to Google Maps and type in Horeb. Let's see what happens. To Horeb, Wisconsin. That's pretty funny. So at least someone else has thought of this, because there are, there's your example. Some Mason named their stone building Mount Horeb. It's in Dane County, Wisconsin. So, okay, that's pretty interesting. But let's zoom in towards Saudi Arabia, shall we? So we already did a lot of these spots towards Mount Sinai, and this is the Mount Sinai region, right? And up here in Jordan, you can imagine Jordan as being the land of the Ishmaelites down into Sharma, right? So this whole area is, and they could have gone away from it. The story goes that they escaped from persecution across the Dahab or whatever. So, but if they were here, and this is the split rock of Moses, there's a story of it matches perfectly all of the biblical narratives more, that they were further east in Saudi Arabia. And so that's kind of interesting, looking at the Saudi Arabian side of things. Let me zoom in a bit more, put on some of these satellite layers for you there. Jebel al-Laz. Okay, and then it's burnt black on the top is the story, and that's because there are volcanoes in this area. And they say that the Israelites had to wait down in the base camp somewhere, which could have been Al-Bad or Al-Mafak, but Al-Bad, it seems like a decent enough place as any, because there's also seaport and everything. And they had to wait for Moses while he went up to the mountain of fire. There's the fire coming out of the mountain. He's like, you wait here. So that this is a much more reasonable location for that. Anyway, I find that interesting. So there's been a number of people trying to go there, and then they've shut it down a bit. It also makes sense when you start the trail north, because St. Catherine is down here. These mountains are not. These are nice mountains. Don't get me wrong, right? But there's something to this. St. Catherine looks important and all. I'm just saying, it's pretty obvious these are taller darker, and the pictures around it. I'm again going to look through that. There's only 13 of them, but let's see what we got here. Yeah, not enough pictures out in the desert there. But you can kind of see, you can imagine these are flat plains and areas where you could hang out 50,000 people or whatever it is, a crazy amount of people. So, biblical locations, Horeb is disputed. Other mentions of Horeb are in Psalms and Malachi, Kings, Chronicles. I don't know. I'm pretty sure Mount Horeb mountain matters. There's a reason why that exists. So let me go back to, where's this lady's face? There we go. I remember we were talking about this idea of God's wife, which is kind of funny sounding. But there's this idea of El-Ea, this he, she, Allah. And Ashera is, in the ancient Semitic religion, a mother goddess who appears in a number of ancient sources. She appears in Akkadian writings by the name of Astratu, which is like Astarte and, Ishtar and these things. And in Hittite writing as Aserdu or Asertu. Ashera is generally considered identical with the Ugaritic god Itaratu. Ashera is identified as the consort of the Sumerian god Anu and Ugaritic El. And then El is, we're going to have to look at El because you think of Elohim, and you gotta acknowledge El. But here's a statue in terracotta of this lady holding her own boobs, and I think that's supposed to be the goddess, is what they're saying. Is there a reason for her doing that? No, she just got them. A digital collection showing an image of Katesh together, and I guess Katesh is also Ashera for some reason. So, the triple goddess stone. Identified as the consort of Anu and El. So let's look at really quickly. We'll look at Anu, the Dinger, right? The symbol here that you'll see, it kind of reminds you of the Catholic XP looking logo. That is, the Chi-Rho. This is where that kind of originates from, arguably, and it is this is the Dinger symbol, and so divine personification of the sky, supreme God, ancestor of all the deities. Anu was believed to be the supreme source of all authority for the other gods. So you can kind of see some of the prototypical ideas of a henotheistic society where you can have your god, but really Anu is the most important. And then going into the Semitic aspects, here is from the Oriental Institute Museum in the University of Chicago. This work is odd. So old, is old enough so that it is public domain. Okay. I don't know, just hoping that they had something to say about the statue. Oh, the gilded statuette of El from Megiddo. Okay, there we go. So, let me look at a few more pictures. Destruction of the Leviathan by El. Supreme god of the Canaanite religion, supreme god of the East Semitic speakers in Mesopotamia's early dynastic period. The word El, cognate to Akkadian, is a northeastern Semitic word meaning god or deity, referring as a proper name to any one of multiple major ancient Near Eastern deities. A rare form, Elah, represents the predicate from the Old Akkadian and in Amorite. The word is derived from the Proto-Semitic meaning God. Specific deities known as El or Il include the supreme god of the ancient Canaanite religion and the supreme god of East Semitic speakers in Mesopotamian early dynastic period. Cognate forms of El are found throughout the Semitic language. They include Ugaritic and Phoenician, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Akkadian, I guess, because Akkadian's a whole other thing, realistically. But is it, or are the Akkadians part of the Akkadians? Is that too much? In Northwest Semitic use, El was a generic word for any god, as well as the special name or title of a particular god who was distinguished from other gods as being the god. El is listed as the head of many pantheons. In some Canaanite and Ugaritic sources, El played a role as father of the gods or creation of both. However, because of the word El sometimes refers to God other than the refers to a god other than the great god El, it is frequently ambiguous as to whether El followed by another name means the great god El with a particular epithet applied or refers to another god entirely. For example, in the Ugaritic text, Il-Milk is understood, Moloch, Il-Moloch is understood to mean El the king, but Il-Hadid, the good Hadad, or Hadad, as the god Hadad. The Semitic root Ich and Allah, Elach, Hebrew Eloach, may be El with a parasitic H, and El may be the abbreviated form of Ilich in Ugaritic. The plural from the meaning gods. The plural form meaning gods is Elichim, equivalent to Hebrew Elohim, powers. In the Hebrew text, this word is interpreted as being semantically singular for God by biblical commentators. However, the documentary hypothesis developed. There's a documentary hypothesis. What does that even mean? Developed originally in the 1870s, identifies, which is one of the models used by biblical scholars of explaining the origins and compositions of the Torah. Okay. Identified these as the different authors, the Javists, the Elohists, the Deuteronomists, and the priestly source, were responsible for editing stories from a polytheistic religion into those of a monotheistic religion. Inconsistencies that arise between monotheism and polytheism in the text are reflective of this hypothesis. So, just really quickly, Babylon, Tower of Babel, Tower of Babel, Bible. Which part is that? It's like Genesis 11? Okay. And then let's do not the NIV. I'd rather do the amped version. Is that available? Is that a thing you can do? Yeah, amplified. Cool. Now the whole earth spoke one language and used the same words, vocabulary. And as people journeyed eastward, they found a plain in the same land of Shinar, and they settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and fire them thoroughly in a kiln to harden and strengthen them." So they use, also just to make sure that this does, yeah, it does do this. Okay, but it says, "Let us," as in Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So that's their explanation. So I'm going to go back to the King James Version just to make sure that we're dealing with the same kind of weird anecdote. The whole world there was of one language and of one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, "Go to, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And that they had bricks for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, "Go to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad up upon the face of the whole earth." So, like, build this tower or else we're going to not be remembered. Like, if we build a tower, we'll make a name for ourselves. You know what I mean? And this is where it gets, like, kind of weirdly polytheistic, but it could be the Trinity. I like their excuse. "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do." So first off, here's the Lord talking to themselves, which is like the Lord said. It's, again, this is straight up a comic book. It's like when Superman says, "Wow, I can't believe I have so much power," or something in a comic book. Like, Superman wouldn't say that, but he would in a comic book. So, word of God. Anyway, he says, "Let's build this tower. Let's stop. Let's not make it wrong." And the Lord came down, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And again, it's also weird that it's in capital letters, because capital letters are capito diminutio maxima, which means like complete rights of the alias removed, right? So this is like something has had their rights removed, so they're being called the Lord without power, in Shakespearean or Roman sense, you know. And the Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they all have one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do." Aw, drat, you know, nothing will be restrained from them. Oh, gee, right? why? Did they do something wrong? Is this a sin? It's just like, So let us go down, and they go to let us go down. Okay? So God says to themselves, and then God does with themselves, and then us. So either God is this hyper schizophrenic thing, and I know they're talking about the Trinity, and I get a hyper schizophrenic actually might be a good description of God, but it sounds more like they're talking about a Sumerian story where there were multiple gods that decided to destroy something after a reset, right? It sounds like a much older story, and there are examples of Tower of Babel stories that are not related to the singular God. And Canaanites have stories of these earthquakes happening. So, I don't know. Just going to say, the Lord, and the same thing with the Noah story. So, the Lord God, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. This will begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. So go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So it's also confound their language is interesting. So it's not just that they created new languages, it's also just made the language confusing. So it could just literally be at some point confounding their language, right? What is that? It's not the same as just saying we humans made a bunch of languages up because we've had our language confounded, because we've had our vocabulary confounded, whatever that means, our ability to communicate. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. Brutal. So, I mean, right there, you've got this idea that the Lord is this series of, it sounds like an Ancient Aliens thing, at least, right? You've got this group of people that are very powerful, and it's called the Lord. And it's almost like the name of, an organization, the Lord. And it's the capital letters thing. It's very weird. I don't know why they would do that. I mean, they know better. They know what capital letters mean, so that's super strange. And scattered across the face of the earth. So let me see if I can pull up. Where's my other window? I don't know if it's Namu. Is Namu what I have open? No, I think it's got to be in here somewhere. Yeah, back to the Western Interior Seaway. Okay. Yeah, Western Interior Seaway is the correct page. So, is it not move? It does move, right? It moves down. Yeah, okay. Western Interior Seaway, Cretaceous period, Seaway. You start to look at this idea of the way things were here, that Missouri has this kind of like Edenian thing. California is this island thing. This is supposed to be so long ago that we can't remember it, but it's somehow made a map that's pretty close to it. Granted, there's some changes in this one, up here, but we've seen even older examples of maps that have these kinds of. Also, there's all these phantom islands, maps that have been made that show places that exist and then they've disappeared. People just completely disappeared from. We jump this past. There's a show called The Lost Islands. It's an Australian show, a television series from like 1976. Aired on channel Network 10, later screened around the world, and it is about a hurricane nearly sinks the United World. A sailing ship holding 40 teenagers from all around the world. Most of them flee to the ship in lifeboats, but the evacuating children are not counted, and 5 are left behind. The storm blows the battered ship across a reef into the lagoon of uncharted land. The island, Tambu, is ruled by a supposedly 200-year-old immortal tyrant called Q, who came to the island on one of the several ships bound for the New Holland. In the center of the island is a valley in which the descendants of the original ship still live. In the manner of an 18th century colonial community, adjacent to Tambu is a smaller island, Malo, which is a barren wasteland. It is noteworthy because of a lagoon where prisoners are forced to dive for blue weed, which, according to the people of Tambu, is refined into a powder, which the Q uses to extend his life. The 5 children befriend a local family, the Quins, who help remain hidden on the island in a swamp avoided by locals because it is, according to the local myth, inhabited by the ghosts of the dead. Most of the episode's storyline pits the children against the Q, who fears the knowledge of the outside world is a threat to his dominion of Tambu. In the final episode, the children do not escape the lost island, but instead remain stranded. As the end of the credits begin, they are seen celebrating the liberation of the village from the tyrant Q, who has retreated into exile on the far tips of the island, plotting his revenge. Unlike most Australian television series at the time, which were either entirely produced by a TV network, The Lost Island was co-produced between the Australian 10 network and a U.S. studio, Paramount. So, kind of important show, shot on 35mm, which is interesting, not usual. Like, this is a highly produced show that they wanted people to see that was just distributed all over the world. And talks about this idea of the Lost Islands. And one of them is Antilla, a phantom-like island that was reputed during the 15th century age of exploration to lie in the Atlantic Ocean far to the west of Portugal and Spain. The island also went by the name Isle of the Seven Cities. It originated from an old Iberian legend set during the Muslim conquest of Hispania. Seeking to flee from the Muslim conquerors, 7 Christian Visigoth bishops embarked with their flocks on ships and set sail westward into the Atlantic Ocean, eventually landing on an island, Antilla, where they founded 7 settlements. The island makes its first explicit appearance as a large rectangular island in the 1424 Portolan chart of Juan Pizigano. Thereafter, it routinely appeared in most nautical charts of the 15th century after 1492, when the north of Atlantic Ocean began to routinely be sailed and became more accurately mapped. Depictions of Antilla gradually disappeared. It nonetheless lent its name to the Spanish Antilles. The routine appearance of such a large Antilia in the 15th century nautical charts has led to speculation that it might represent the American landmass, and has fueled many theories of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact. So, this idea of 1489 map featuring Antilla on the west in relation to the Iberian Peninsula. Let me see if I can zoom in on this. This must be a huge picture. It's taking forever to load. Wow. Yeah, that's going to be a big picture. Okay. So, but examples of giant land masses that were misnamed, explained away, had 3 different names and were the same island, you know. For instance, Brazil, High Brazil, and several other phantom islands said to lie in the Atlantic Ocean west of Ireland. So people believed in Brazil before Brazil in 1325. I mean, when you start getting into this idea of there being misunderstandings from the original narrative of people who've actually been to this place, and some of these sailors were illiterate, so many of the people didn't write down that they went to these places, it becomes pretty obvious that there was Brazil, even in the 13th century. I make notifications go away. Don't allow sites to send notifications. Ha ha. Okay. Crockerland, Davis Land, sighted by pirate Edward Davis along the Pacific Ocean. Let's see. Yeah, no, I think Antilles is probably the best example of Iberian contact of American conquest by people escaping Islamic rule, but it's probably even older than that. It originates from an old Iberian legend, right? So there are, set during the Muslim conquest in 714. So it's probably much older than that. How come I still getting notifications? It's terrible. Okay, well, guys, the thing is, today, let me jump back to my OBS. Today is the birthday of a 5-year-old boy named Sawyer, and I have to go make sure to see him. So that's why I did my show early today, and I want to wish you guys all well, but I'm probably going to have to take off in a second. Let me look through comments, and see if there's anything to check out. Electricity, the Elites as another one. You think of the elite, the Elites. Night owling it again. Well, I do, there's the, the, what's it called? The guy who relaxes is helping the axes. So you got to make sure you spend a lot of time doing stuff. Girls just look different back then. Well, girls look different all the time. Each girl has their own look. It's not true. Anthony Yost was under the impression the Sphinx was originally Anubis, and they built it just disappeared. Built a huge statue for that. Well, so there was a lot of different gods. Which one's the Egyptian Ram's god? Let me go back to that for just a second. What is his name again? Because it's associated with Amun-Ra, but I don't think it is Amun-Ra. It's just his guard. Khnum, right? Yeah. Let me see if you can see my screen. Yeah, no, that's Namu. Khnum. So Khnum was one of the earliest known Egyptian deities, originally the god of the source of the Nile. Since the annual flooding of the Nile brought with it a silt and clay, and its water brought life to its surrounding, he was thought to be the creator of the bodies of human children, which he made at a potter's wheel from clay and placed in their mother's wombs. He was later described as having molded the other deities, and he had the title Divine Potter and the Lord of created things from himself. So, when you think about it, there's a lot of reason. Like Abraham said, who was my creator? Who's the real creator? And the answer would have been Khnum, but maybe not Khnum from the Egyptian perspective. And it's important to remember a lot of our ideas about Egyptian perspective are influenced by the Rosicrucians and from people just from Europeans in the 1800s. But there's also influence from Europeans in the 7th century and 10th century who went to Alexandria, and Greeks really are the culprit of influence. But realistically, they're breaking apart what was already a more sophisticated understanding of ancient Egypt, because ancient Egypt was where the Greeks got their Hellenism from. The idea that there was a more ancient thing that was even a higher culture. So there are other gods I would like to find a connection to, like equivalent. Ram god Canaan. Let's try that. Rama, no. Etic. Horn deities. Well, there's a whole page here that I'll have to look into tomorrow on horn deities, because there's another interesting thing, which is Moses was thought to be horned originally, right? And so you see that the Egyptians are these pictures of them with horns, and but you look at Moses' horns, and I think the word halo and horns are confusing for some reason between Phoenician, Egyptian, and Greek or something. I forget which one was the culprit. But all of these pictures, he's got horns. All the statues in Europe. So that's hard not to acknowledge. Moses has horns in these pictures. And that's just crazy, right? But then compare that to Egyptian pictures, and it's identical. And so Hathor, cow goddess, often depicted with horns. Isis depicted with horns, and Jupiter, Amun. But yeah, ram statues for Amun's temples. So the creators of Amun. So, and there's a number of creators. So it's an interesting way to look at it. This idea that maybe he was the sculptor who worked for and there's this whole pantheon that represent this ideology. Setet also is the consort of Khnum, and sometimes conflated with Isis and Sopdet, so goddess of the bright star Sirius. So it's the ancient importance of some of these other characters that we're like, oh, they're all the same character. It's like, Sopdet is different than ISIS. There are moments when they have different connections over them, and we just kind of want to combine them. But you look at some of they're similar enough in the sense that they are related, but when we look at the Egyptian stuff, we're getting a lot less clear of a picture than if you look at the Canaanite text now, because for whatever reason, the idea of Egyptian mysticism and Egyptology is cemented. It's just for the last few hundred years and for 1,000 years before that, everyone knows that they believe in Egypt, whatever that means, even though there's no place called Egypt until the Greeks stopped calling Kemet what it was, and then they made a new name for it based on a fantasy novel, literally a fantasy novel. It's why California is named California. It's why Egypt's named Egypt. They read a folktale and they're like, we're going to call this place after this folktale, but it's already something that existed before it. So for whatever reason, they studied that first. Now we're finding more Canaanite, Canaanite, whatever you want to call it, canonical research. I like that. It's strictly canon. So if you can get your hands on the research that's from the Phoenician texts, what we're finding is also the difference between Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, and Phoenician is like the difference between American and British. So they're very close and it's easy to understand, but also it's easy to pick up on the fact that it's Hebrew or it's Avramic, Hevramic, Aivram, from Abram. And so that becomes more and more interesting in this idea that Khnum, this ram's god, and he has a wife, and as time goes on, they're like, no, you don't get it. We have to get rid of all the symbols. And what does Islam do? It continues that idea of just like to smash all the idols, get rid of all the. So it's a iconoclastic reset that's not even from a weather change. It's just from people smashing stuff. And yeah, that's important to check out. So let me just really quickly again check the last of these comments. I think we're pretty good on that. Cool. Just want to do my due diligence. A lot of comments today. All right, guys. I will talk to you soon. Monday is when I'm going to do another daily. I have a video. Oh, happy Friday the 13th. That's right. Happy Donald Duck's birthday as well. This is such a crazy synchronicity. So I did a talk with Golden Gate Starfort Command, and I'm going to put that up, but I have to go to this birthday party first. So there'll be another video later today. So take care. Happy Friday the 13th, and be careful out there. Or, have a good Friday the 13th. You know what? Dude, do I have to do like a really quick? I kind of have to, don't I? I kind of have to be like Friday the 13th. It just feels relevant, and I have just enough time to probably get away with this. So hold on. Nope. Yep. Very good. Friday the 13th. Unlucky day in Western superstition. Gregorian falls on a Friday. Unluckiness. According to folklore historian Donald Dossie, Norse myth, 12 gods having a dinner party in Valhalla. The trickster god is Loki, who is not invited, arrives at the 13th guest, and arranged for Hodor to shoot Balder with the mistletoe tip-toed arrow. Christian Association associates with Jesus' Last Supper, and then Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, in conjunction with Friday. Where's the Templar thing? Anything? No? No Templar? Nothing? No Templar? No Templar? Really? Okay, well then there's no point in reading that. All right. Take care, everybody. Enjoy your...
Through a shaded closed window in his 10th floor room. Frank Olson was the first known fatality in the CIA's LSD program. Olson left behind a widow, Alice, and 3 children. But it would be years before they learned the real story of his death. Shortly after his suicide, Alice Olson was visited by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the man who had administered the drug, and by Robert Lashbrook, his deputy, who was the last person with Frank Olson the night of his death.
Oh yeah.
It was probably the
like, share, and subscribe.
whether I was handling myself and handling the
Send me
situation,
more
whether I was
super chats.
hysterical. And I'm sure they left the house feeling ever so
Listen
much
to
better
Anthony
because
Yost.
I had been gracious and hospitable
Do what
to
Anthony
them,
Yost
so that
says.
I must have played right into their hand and made them feel fine.
23 years later, how did you feel about that meeting?
My anger was unbelievable at how I had been duped for this length of time, and the anguish which was unnecessary.
Anyone who knew during all of those years never told Alice Olson the real story of her husband's death. She would discover it by accident more than 2 decades later. In essence, it was a 22-year-long cover-up. Lyman Kirkpatrick was Inspector General of the CIA at the time of Frank Olson's death.
But had not the Olson case occurred within the secret confines of the CIA, would not this case have been a prosecutable case? Perhaps manslaughter?
I would think definitely prosecutable, and certainly from the point of view of Mr. Olson, why it should probably have been actionable.
Frank Olson's suicide slowed down the CIA's testing of LSD and other drugs, but only momentarily. The CIA was not the only government agency interested in the possibilities LSD and other drugs presented for mind control. The Army Chemical Corps first started working with the CIA and then branched off on its own. It too tested drugs on unwitting victims, and a death would result. The case of this man, Harold Blower, a tennis pro, seen here with his daughter Elizabeth, is well known. In 1953, Blower was a private patient at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. He was given 5 injections of a mescaline derivative that was being tested secretly for the Army Chemical Corps. With the 5th injection, Harold Blower died. As with the Olson case, a 22-year cover-up followed, until finally the Army admitted the real details of Blower's death. Since the initial news stories of Harold Blower's death, close to 5,000 documents, previously classified, have been released by the Army and obtained by ABC News. They provide valuable insight into Army activities at the time of Blower's death and where the Army went from there with their own drug testing program. From a previously classified deposition of Dr. James Cattell, who administered the mescaline derivative, on the purpose of the drug testing, to produce symptoms similar to those that you see in schizophrenia, on how much the patient knew about all this. We didn't delineate all the possibilities of what might happen because then you contaminate your experiment. Cattell then relates that he never even knew what drug he had given Harold Blower because of the secrecy of the Army experiments. We didn't know whether it was dog piss. This was secret. This was a secret. We weren't in on it. We asked Blower's daughter Elizabeth for her reaction.
What? How can anybody react to that? I mean, that is so far from what you'd expect from a human being, never mind a doctor, never mind a professional specialist who's supposed to care about people's minds. It's unbelievable.
A suit filed by Elizabeth Barrett against the Army Chemical Corps is now pending in federal court. Other Army experiments continued on mental patients around the country. Work done at the Tulane Medical Center in New Orleans involved several drugs, hallucinogenics, and electrodes implanted in the brain. The chief researcher was Dr. Russell Monroe, now head of the psychiatry department at the University of Maryland. These are various progress reports written by Dr. Monroe and recently obtained by ABC News. From one of the progress reports, a report of a woman who had electrodes implanted in the brain and was then given LSD and other drugs. She became agitated, cried, lapsed into a trance-like state. Felt as if she were about to have a convulsion, experienced waves of darkness and light, had bizarre sensations in her neck and legs, said somebody was trying to manipulate her body. At this point, Dr. Monroe wrote that the woman was obviously having paranoid ideas.
As a layperson, perhaps you can enlighten me. What therapeutic effect would the type of experiment that I just described have on a patient?
Well, the therapeutic effect would be indirect.
Was this patient aware that she was being given LSD?
Yes, I mean, they were told that they would be given some medication, and they should have
Specifically LSD?
Well, we told them, I don't think that they would have even known what LSD was then at the time. They were told that they would be given some medication which might make them feel worse.
Dr. Monroe, what do you think the Army Chemical Corps was looking for in all of this testing?
They were looking for an incapacitating agent, an agent that would not harm the person permanently, but would incapacitate them temporarily. That seemed like a humanistic way to wage a war, if war is necessary.
When James Thornwell was given LSD by Army intelligence in 1961, this time it was no experiment. This time, the express purpose was to peel back Thornwell's brain to bear any secret within it. This time, the Army had gone operational. Thornwell, as reported on ABC last January, was an Army private stationed in Orléans, France. Classified documents were missing from his unit. Thornwell became a suspect. His 2.5-month interrogation included administration of sodium pentothal, hypnosis, isolation, and deprivation of sleep. Army documents obtained by ABC News refer to this interrogation as conventional. Despite this severe questioning, Army intelligence was getting nowhere with Thornwell, and it was decided to slip him LSD. For 16 years, Thornwell never knew what had hit him.
Tell me about the acid.
I'd rather not. It's a bad trip. Bad trip. That was a bad trip. The pain was so excruciating. It felt like somebody was sticking me with 1,000,000 pins. Just everywhere. Oh, it just... I walked around.
What's up?
I lived through it.
No charges were ever brought by the Army against Thornwell. He was discharged for psychological disorders. But an Army psychiatric evaluation of Thornwell obtained by ABC News, one which was done prior to Thornwell having been given LSD, says of him, fairly cooperative, oriented, alert, and gave no evidence of psychosis or depression. From the Army's point of view, this type of LSD interrogation was a success. Other documents refer to the exploitability of interrogation subjects, cracking them, keeping them off balance mentally, and providing an economical, speedy, and productive aid to interrogation. From James Thornwell's point of view, it was no success. Thornwell still has serious problems. He's run through 2 marriages, he maintains he can't hold a job, can't concentrate, has nightmares, and feels socially and emotionally isolated. Last fall,